Chapter 1876. Let me tell you, Limitless Palace doesn't allow private fights. If you dare to attack me, then be prepared to receive the punishment. Chewing Fei's voice was trembling, but she still looked at Bailey Hongzhuang fiercely. She couldn't weaken her momentum now, otherwise, Bailey Hongzhuang would be even more unscrupulous. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't put Chewing Fei's threat in her eyes at all. After killing you, what kind of punishment I will receive is my business. You don't need to worry about it. But now, you should worry about yourself. Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was indifferent and cold, without the slightest bit of warmth. It was as cold as a glacier in the extreme north, incomparably cold. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Chewing Fei's face became extremely ugly. She never thought that Bailey Hongzhuang's personality would be so stubborn, completely different from her appearance. Even though she had already mentioned the sex rules, Bailey Hongzhuang was still unmoved. At this moment, she really didn't know what to do. The surrounding disciples looked at this dramatic scene, and their expressions were full of surprise and lamentation. Previously, they only thought that Chewing Fei was not Bailey Hongzhuang's opponent at all. After knowing Bailey Hongzhuang's identity, they only thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was not Chewing Fei's opponent. However, they never thought that in just a short period of time, the situation would change again. The person who now had the upper hand was still Bailey Hongzhuang. At this moment, Pei Yifan was standing at the side. His mood was very complicated. Although today was the first time he saw Bailey Hongzhuang, everything that Bailey Hongzhuang showed gave people a different feeling. Clearly, Bailey Hongzhuang was the one who was at a disadvantage, but Bailey Hongzhuang never showed the slightest bit of worry. On the contrary, he only felt that from beginning to end, all the changes were under Bailey Hongzhuang's control. What do you want? After knowing Bailey Hongzhuang's tough attitude, Chewing Fei knew that no matter how she threatened Bailey Hongzhuang at this moment, it would only have the opposite effect. Therefore, at this moment of life and death, she could only temporarily put down her dignity and listen to Bailey Hongzhuang's orders. What I want to do, I've already said it very clearly before. However, I think that my previous actions were too lenient. Bailey Hongzhuang spoke slowly, a cold smile on her lips. If you kowtow and admit your mistake, I'll let you go. Pay her back in her own coin, you. When Bailey Hongzhuang say this, Bailey Hongzhuang, and Bailey Hongzhuang, Bailey Hongzhuang's, chew everything, was to say Hongzhuang. To Bailey Hongzhuang not, you Hongzhuang, Bailey Hongzhuang. Thinking of this, everyone felt that it was a little funny. Things in the world really could not be predicted in advance. Chewing Fei's face turned red. She knew that Bailey Hongzhuang wanted to use this method to humiliate her. However, it was useless to know. Her life was now in Bailey Hongzhuang's hands. She could only listen to Bailey Hongzhuang. She had no other choice. I don't have much patience. I'll give you 3 seconds. If you don't make a choice, then I'll have to make the decision for you. Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was cold. She looked at Chewing Fei with eyes full of cruelty and murderous intent, without any warmth. Chapter 1877. Bailey Hongzhuang's words were like a warning bell that rang in Chewing Fei's ears. Her emotions were complicated to the extreme. Her mind was constantly calculating how to escape from Bailey Hongzhuang's claws. However, Bailey Hongzhuang's right hand was now tightly clasped around her neck. She could feel that as long as she moved slightly, Bailey Hongzhuang would definitely not hold back. 2. Bailey Hongzhuang continued to count. Everyone's eyes fell on Chewing Fei. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's calm and composed appearance, it was obvious that everything she said was true. If Chewing Fei didn't kowtow and admit her mistake now, Bailey Hongzhuang would really take her life. 1. The moment Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, her hand that was holding Chewing Fei's neck tightened quietly. After Chewing Fei felt Bailey Hongzhuang's change, she completely panicked and immediately said, "Wait, I apologize. I'll apologize now." As soon as she said this, everyone's expression changed. It seemed that their prediction was not wrong. The person who was at a disadvantage in the end was still Chewing Fei. Bailey Hongzhuang looked indifferently at Chewing Fei. Since you've already made your decision, then kowtow and admit your mistake now. Bailey Hongzhuang's posture was arrogant. Her pitch-black phoenix eyes rippled with a cold light. Toward a person like Chewing Fei, she would not give her any face at all. Only through this method would Chewing Fei know the price of offending her. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Chewing Fei nodded repeatedly. She did not dare to delay any longer. In the next moment, under everyone's shocked gazes, Chewing Fei directly knelt in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. It was all my fault before. I won't dare to do it again. Chewing Fei lowered her head. Fragments of sunlight shone on her body. Her eyelids drooped slightly, leaving a shadow on her face. No one could see the look in her eyes, and no one could tell what she was thinking in her heart. Seeing that Chewing Fei had already apologized, Bailey Hongzhuang withdrew her hand. Since Chewing Fei had already learned her lesson, she was not prepared to continue pursuing the matter. In fact, she was not in the mood to deal with such trouble. If Chewing Fei had not taken the initiative to provoke her again and again, she would not have cared at all. I didn't expect that in the end, it was Chewing Fei who apologized. Bailey Hongzhuang is really amazing. Chewing Fei actually kowtowed to apologize in front of everyone. In the future, she won't be able to raise her head in front of Bailey. She probably won't be able to raise her head in front of Bailey Hongzhuang in the future. Who told Chewing Fei to reap what she sowed? If she didn't take the initiative to provoke Bailey Hongzhuang, how could there be such trouble now? Chewing Fei has always bullied the weak and feared the strong. If Bailey Hongzhuang was not strong enough, I think the one being bullied now would be Bailey Hongzhuang. After Chewing Fei kowtowed and apologized, she was ready to stand up. But at the moment Chewing Fei was about to stand up, Bailey Hongzhuang's voice sounded again. You haven't apologized to Pei Yifan yet, Bailey Hongzhuang said coldly. Hearing this, Chewing Fei was stunned for a moment. Her gaze fell on Pei Yifan. Feeling Chewing Fei's gaze, Pei Yifan was slightly taken aback. He frowned and said, forget it. He never had any good impression of Chewing Fei. Similarly, he would not care too much. The reason why he stood up before was that he felt that Chewing Fei's words were too much. Chapter 1878. Hearing Pei Yifan's words, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but look at Pei Yifan. Looking at Pei Yifan's righteous and indifferent expression, Bailey Hongzhuang understood that Pei Yifan probably didn't care about these things at all. However, Pei Yifan's disdain was Pei Yifan's business, but Chewing Fei had insulted Pei Yifan because of her. Therefore, she couldn't let this matter end just like that. Hurry up and apologize. Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was cold as she urged Chewing Fei. Chewing Fei glanced at Bailey Hongzhuang and could only unwillingly apologize to Pei Yifan. I'm sorry. Pei Yifan nodded slightly and said, let's leave it at that. He knew very well that if Chewing Fei wasn't forced to apologize, she wouldn't have done this at all. Therefore, he didn't care too much about it. However, he felt a little different about Bailey Hongzhuang's insistence. After all, Bailey Hongzhuang only stood out to deal with Chewing Fei because he was slandered by Chewing Fei. Bailey Hongzhuang also stood out to make Chewing Fei apologize to him. All of this showed that Bailey Hongzhuang was a person who knew how to repay kindness. Anyone like this wouldn't be bad. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang also nodded. Since Pei Yifan didn't care about it, she didn't need to care about anything else. To her, the most important thing now was to pass the Wind Canyon's test. Since that's the case, let's end this matter like this. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly said. The surrounding core disciples' expressions changed when they saw Bailey Hongzhuang like this. Although Bailey Hongzhuang taught Chewing Fei a lesson today, most of the cultivators had a scale in their hearts and could see this matter clearly. From the beginning to the end, Chewing Fei was the one who went to find trouble with Bailey Hongzhuang. Therefore, when Chewing Fei was taught a lesson, they didn't think there was anything wrong with it. On the contrary, the reason why Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly flared up was because of Pei Yifan. This was the reason why they sighed. I feel that Bailey Hongzhuang's character is quite good. Pei Yifan stood up for her. She didn't pretend to be weak. nor did she pretend to ignore him. Instead, she asked Chewing Fei to apologize to Pei Yifan. Just this point alone can tell that Bailey Hongzhuang is a good person. That's right, I feel. I can't just ignore Chewing Fei's S. She can't be ignored. This isn't something an ordinary person can do. Yiz is. Hongzhuang teet. St at the zhuang. From this alone, they could ant teet. Tst. Bailey Hongzhuang walked towards the wind canyon after settling this matter. She had already figured out how to improve the situation. Now, she needed to keep trying to find a way. In fact, she didn't know any other disciples apart from Pei Yifan. Therefore, there was no use for her to stay here. Chewing Fei's expression became even uglier when she heard that everyone was siding with Bailey Hongzhuang. She never thought that after she was humiliated like this, everyone would still side with Bailey Hongzhuang. This was something she couldn't accept. Chapter 1879. Previously, Pei Yifan inexplicably spoke up for Bailey Hongzhuang. She had never liked Pei Yifan's behavior anyway, so it was not a big deal to have a conflict with him. However, many cultivators stood on her side and mocked Bailey Hongzhuang. Now, the situation had changed. Everyone stood on Bailey Hongzhuang's side. She felt as if she deserved to be in such a situation. Thinking of this, Chewing Fei felt that she could not tolerate it at all. She was just a newcomer to Bailey Hongzhuang, and she was not even a cultivator of Limitless Palace. Now, she was using her as a stepping stone to win people's hearts. How could this be? Chewing Fei looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with eyes full of hatred. She had been in Limitless Palace for so long, and no one had ever dared to treat her like this. No, this was absolutely not allowed. In the next moment, under everyone's astonished gaze, Chewing Fei directly took out a dagger and rushed towards Bailey Hongzhuang without hesitation. Bailey Hongzhuang, I'm going to kill you. The origin energy in Chewing Fei's body exploded in an instant. She pushed her speed to the limit, and an image kept appearing in her mind. She wanted to ruthlessly stab her dagger into Bailey Hongzhuang's body. She wanted to use Bailey Hongzhuang's blood to wash away all the humiliation from before. Only then could she raise her head and face everyone again. This sudden scene exceeded all the cultivators' expectations. They never thought that after the previous incident, Chewing Fei would suddenly lose control. They could clearly feel the murderous aura that erupted from Chewing Fei's body. Obviously, Chewing Fei hated Bailey Hongzhuang to the core and wanted to take Bailey Hongzhuang's life. Pei Yifan also did not expect Chewing Fei to suddenly do this. He was stunned for a moment. The moment he reacted, he wanted to warn Bailey Hongzhuang. However, it was too late to say anything. Just as he was about to warn her, Chewing Fei had already rushed behind Bailey Hongzhuang. Junior sister Bailey, be careful, Pei Yifan shouted. When he said this, Pei Yifan's eyes were filled with deep helplessness and sadness. Chewing Fei's dagger was just inches away. It would be useless for him to warn her now. Bailey Hongzhuang also felt Chewing Fei quickly approaching from behind, and her dark eyes were filled with a cold light. It seemed that her judgment was right. Chewing Fei was not someone who would give up. When she was teaching Chewing Fei a lesson, she knew that Chewing Fei was not someone who would give up so easily. However, after seeing Chewing Fei, Bailey Hongzhuang, she S's was. So, Bailey Hongzhuang's, when she was Bailey Hongzhuang's, Bailey was Yaya Ying Fei? If Chewing Fei did not continue to pester her, then the medicine would not have any effect on Chewing Fei. However, Chewing Fei insisted on forcing her, so she could only let Chewing Fei experience the consequences. After all, cultivators who seek their own deaths deserved it. Chewing Fei's dagger ruthlessly stabbed down. When she saw the dagger getting closer and closer to Bailey Hongzhuang, the smile on her face became even more sinister and happy. At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang was going to die in her hands. Chapter 1880. Everyone's pupils instantly dilated. None of them would have thought that Bailey Hongzhuang would actually lose her life in such a situation. Previously, Bailey Hongzhuang still had a complete victory. Who would have thought that Chewing Fei would actually choose to launch a sneak attack? This was truly impossible to guard against. Bailey Hongzhuang is really finished now. She's too unlucky. Chewing Fei is really despicable. She actually chose to launch a sneak attack. This kind of method is simply not presentable. I'm afraid that Chewing Fei is so angry that she would do such an irrational thing. If Elder Su finds out about this later, Chewing Fei will definitely not be able to escape unscathed. Everyone shook their heads. This kind of Chewing Fei was like a mad dog. Once she entangled someone, she would not let go at all. It really made people feel helpless. Compared to everyone's helplessness and disdain, Chewing Fei's eyes were filled with excitement. To the current her, nothing else was important. At this moment, she only wanted to kill Bailey Hongzhuang. Otherwise, she would definitely not be able to take this lying down. Just when everyone thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was definitely going to die, the next scene shocked everyone. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang quickly used the shadow shifting technique. Her figure flashed, and she appeared 5 meters away from her original position. Chewing Fei's dagger fiercely stabbed down. However, she did not feel the slightest bit of resistance. It was as if she pounced on empty air. Seeing this, Chewing Fei could not help but frown. She did not understand what was going on. Immediately after, Chewing Fei and the group of cultivators saw Bailey Hongzhuang's figure appear 5 meters away. Immediately, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air at the same time. Their faces were filled with shock. Heavens, in that situation just now, Bailey Hongzhuang was actually able to dodge. This is too shocking. Just how terrifying is Bailey Hongzhuang's speed? I didn't see the previous scene, and I still haven't seen how Bailey Hongzhuang disappeared. It's too scary. Almost all the cultivators were amazed by Bailey Hongzhuang's speed. Such speed was really unexpected. Pei Yifan breathed a sigh of relief after seeing this scene. Fortunately, Bailey Hongzhuang's reaction was fast enough. Otherwise, she would have become a corpse by now. I'm afraid Chewing Fei is going to be in trouble now. It was unknown which cultivator side, but everyone's gaze was focused on Chewing Fei. Chewing Fei didn't even succeed in killing Bailey Hongzhuang with that perfect opportunity just now. Now that Bailey Hongzhuang was on guard, Chewing Fei had even less hope. He was afraid that the consequences that Chewing Fei would have to bear now would be much worse than before. Chewing Fei was also dumbfounded at this moment. She stared blankly at the dagger in her hand and Bailey Hongzhuang, who was standing in front of her. She could not understand. Her speed was clearly very fast just now. Why was Bailey Hongzhuang still able to dodge the attack? Facing the situation in front of her, she only felt that her mind was blank. Succeed or die trying. This sentence was undoubtedly the portrayal of the situation in front of her. Facing Bailey Hongzhuang's astonishing speed, she could not help but feel an indescribable fear in her heart. It was as if she was not Bailey Hongzhuang's opponent at all. Chapter 1881. Bailey Hongzhuang looked coldly at Chewing Fei and said slowly, "I wanted to let you go, but it seems that you don't appreciate it." As soon as these words came out, Chewing Fei's heart skipped a beat. An ominous premonition spread in her heart. Although Bailey Hongzhuang's expression was very calm, as if she was only talking about the weather today, she could still feel Bailey Hongzhuang's faint murderous aura and threat. However, she couldn't say anything right now. Beg for mercy? If she really did that, she wouldn't have the face to see anyone in the future. Fight head on. She didn't want to die like this. When Bailey Hongzhuang dealt with her earlier, she had already seen Bailey Hongzhuang's methods. However, Bailey Hongzhuang only used her hand previously. If she changed to a dagger now, it would be difficult for her to escape death. Thinking of this, Chewing Fei couldn't help but feel regret. If she knew this would happen, she wouldn't have done these things impulsively. However, no matter how much Chewing Fei regretted it now, it was all useless. Now, all the decisions were in Bailey Hongzhuang's hands. She didn't have any room to maneuver. At this moment, Chewing Fei only wanted to escape quickly. Only by escaping now could she have a chance to live. Otherwise, with Bailey Hongzhuang's current appearance, she was afraid that she would really lose her life here. However, when she thought of escaping, Chu Yingfei couldn't help but think of Bailey Hongzhuang's terrifying speed. She was afraid that before she could escape, Bailey Hongzhuang would have already caught her. At this moment, Chu Yingfei suddenly remembered that Elder Su was around this wind canyon. As long as she shouted and attracted Elder Su, she didn't believe that Bailey Hongzhuang could kill her in front of Elder Su. Bailey Hongzhuang wouldn't have such courage unless she no longer wanted to stay in Limitless Palace. Chu Yingfei's originally gloomy eyes suddenly lit up after she understood this point. In the next moment, under everyone's astonished gazes, Chu Yingfei loudly shouted, "Elder Su, save me!" This sudden change was beyond everyone's expectations. Everyone's faces were filled with astonishment. None of them would have thought that Chu Yingfei would suddenly call out to Elder Su at this time. I find that this Chu Yingfei is becoming more and more shameless. She was the one who started this. I didn't expect her to have the face to ask Elder Su for help. That's true. Bailey Hongzhuang is a disciple of the Tiangang sect who came to cultivate the limitless method. Now, that Chu Yingfei has shown such a side, it has really caused all of us to lose face. It was unknown which cultivator said this, but the faces of all the disciples present became ugly. There had always been a certain amount of competition between the major sections. Although the limitless method and the Tiangang sect didn't have much contact, they still had the opportunity to meet occasionally. In their opinion, Bailey Hongzhuang, as a disciple of the Tiangang sect, must have come to Limitless Palace to cultivate this time to learn. After Bailey Hongzhuang returned to the Tiangang sect, he would definitely tell the cultivators of the Tiangang sect what he saw in Limitless Palace. Chapter 1882. Chu Yingfei naturally knew what the other core disciples were thinking, but for her now, the most important thing was to protect her own life. As for whether she would lose face or not, that was something to think about later. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Chu Yingfei in front of her, and the ridicule in her eyes became deeper and deeper. In her opinion, this Chu Yingfei was really a piece of rat shit that ruined a pot of porridge. There was actually such a shameless cultivator among the core disciples of Limitless Palace. If Chu Yingfei represented Limitless Palace in the future, she would probably completely lose face for Limitless Palace. However, even though she had already lost face, Chu Yingfei still had a self-satisfied look on her face, as if she had thought of a clever idea. It was really too laughable. Su Heshuan was originally cultivating not far from Wind Canyon. If there was nothing to do on a normal day, the core disciples could just cultivate by themselves. The other disciples would only look for him if there was something more important. When Su Heshuan heard someone asking for help, he couldn't help but frown. Limitless Palace had always prohibited cultivators from fighting in private. For such a long time, such a thing had never happened. How could someone suddenly ask for help? Chapter 1883. Su Heshuan's voice was cold and full of majesty. His wise and sharp gaze swept across all the cultivators present. Everyone felt Su Heshuan's gaze and withdrew their gazes and lowered their heads. Elder Su still had absolute prestige among them. Usually, Elder Su's words carried enormous weight. They would not offend Elder Su at all. After Su Heshuan noticed everyone's expression, his gaze finally stopped on Bailey Hongzhuang and Chu Yingfei. Previously, he and Bailey Hongzhuang only had a short exchange. However, judging from Bailey Hongzhuang's attitude, he still had a good impression of Bailey Hongzhuang. He did not expect that trouble would arise in such a short time. However, he also had a certain understanding of Chu Yingfei. Usually, there were many cultivators who had conflicts with Chu Yingfei. Now that there was a conflict, he had to understand a real situation before making a decision. You said that Bailey Hongzhuang wanted to kill you? Su Heshuan looked at Chu Yingfei. His majestic face was filled with doubt and surprise. Chu Yingfei nodded repeatedly. Her eyes were filled with resentment as she looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. The original nervousness in her eyes had turned into pride and unbridled arrogance. However, when she turned her head to look at Su Heshuan, her face became delicate and pitiful again. She was flustered everywhere. Yes, Elder Su. This Bailey Hongzhuang is too arrogant. She is clearly not a disciple of Limitless Palace, but her words and actions are very domineering. She actually wanted to kill me in Limitless Palace. This is too much. Hearing Chu Yingfei's words, Su Huan frowned even more. I'm asking you what happened. If nothing happened, why would Bailey Hongzhuang want to kill you? Elder Su said. As soon as these words came out, Chu Yingfei's face turned ugly. According to Chu Yingfei's thoughts, Su Huan was an elder of Limitless Palace, so he would definitely choose to stand on her side when facing this matter. However, now that Su Huan asked about the whole process of the matter, she did not know how to answer. There were so many cultivators present. She did not know whether these people would stand on her side or on Bailey Hongzhuang's side. If the situation, she said, was completely different for what the other cultivators said, then she was afraid that Elder Su's impression of her would be greatly reduced. Looking at Chu Yingfei's vague appearance, Su Huan's eyes gradually flashed with a hint of understanding. It seemed that this matter was not that simple. After encountering such a situation, the surrounding disciples fell into silence one after another. However, no one chose to leave because they wanted to know how Elder Su would deal with this matter. Seeing that Chu Yingfei didn't speak for a long time, Su Haoxuan's eyes turned to Bailey Hongzhuang and said, "Tell me, what happened?" Listening to Su Huan's question, Bailey Hongzhuang thought for a moment and decided to tell Su Huan everything that had happened before. Master didn't tell Elder Su about her identity. Presumably, Elder Su's thoughts were the same as the other core disciples. In their eyes, she was just a disciple of Tiangang's sect. Although they did not know the reason for coming to Limitless Palace to cultivate, everyone could guess that it was for the exchange. Chapter 1884. Chu Yingfei first provoked me verbally, and then she was forced to apologize to me. Just as I was about to go to the Wind Canyon to cultivate, Chu Yingfei suddenly launched a sneak attack on me, and I dodged it. Now that Chu Yingfei was caught by me, she shouted that I wanted to kill her, and she called Elder Su over. Bailey Hongzhuang said these words calmly and smoothly. Her exquisite and outstanding face was filled with righteousness, and her pitch-black phoenix eyes were bright without the slightest bit of evasion. This matter, from the beginning to the end, was not started by her. Since Chu Yingfei was now the villain who complained first, she naturally had to tell the truth and not let Chu Yingfei frame her like this. After hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Su Huan's expression changed a bit, and he looked at Chu Yingfei with a bit of anger. Chu Yingfei was his disciple, and he naturally had a certain understanding of Chu Yingfei. The situation that Bailey Hongzhuang said was very similar to Chu Yingfei's usual personality. If this matter was really like this, then he would not be surprised at all. Although it was only Bailey Hongzhuang who said this, in Su Huan's heart, he felt that this was very likely. Chu Yingfei, is this really the case? Su Huan's gaze fell on Chu Yingfei, and even his dignified voice became a bit colder. If this matter was true, then Chu Yingfei had always been looking for trouble, and now she came to him for help. Then this Chu Yingfei really had no backbone at all. He had always thought that it was very normal for there to be conflicts between cultivators. However, since she was a core disciple of Limitless Palace, then she had to bear the consequences of her own actions. She absolutely could not be a cowardly rat. Chu Yingfei's expression was very complicated, and her mind was constantly thinking about how to answer Elder Su's question at this moment. From Elder Su's attitude, she could tell that if she admitted this matter, Elder Su's attitude towards her would definitely not be good. Who knows, she might even be punished in the end. Elder Su, Bailey Hongzhuang, is framing me. Chu Yingfei hurriedly said with a determined expression. Her gaze towards Bailey Hongzhuang was filled with anger. I saw that Bailey Hongzhuang was a new disciple, so I wanted to get to know her. I didn't expect that she wouldn't even spare me a glance. After that, the conflict between us grew bigger and bigger, and she actually wanted to kill me. That's why I called out to you, Elder Su. After Chu Yingfei finished speaking, she couldn't help but look at the surrounding core disciples. Right now, she already had no way out. She could only hope that her attitude would be able to let the other core disciples understand her thoughts. As long as these core disciples could stand on her side, then this crisis would be completely resolved. Although the attitude of these core disciples previously seemed as if they were all standing on Bailey Hongzhuang's side, but they were all fence-sitters. As long as she inverted black and white with enough vigor, she believed that the others wouldn't seek trouble for themselves. After all, for many cultivators, it was best to play it safe. Looking at Chu Yingfei's hypocritical and pretentious appearance, Bailey Hongzhuang really felt that it was funny. Chapter 1885. After saying all this, Chu Yingfei quietly turned around and raised her eyebrows at Bailey Hongzhuang with a smile. Her expression was full of provocation and smugness. In terms of disguise, she was much better than Bailey Hongzhuang. After hearing Chu Yingfei's and Bailey Hongzhuang's completely different statements, Su Huan glanced back and forth between Bailey Hongzhuang and Chu Yingfei. Although the two of them had different statements, Su Huan already had a certain judgment in his heart. In the next second, Su Huan directly looked at the surrounding disciples and said, "Tell me, who is telling the truth?" As soon as Su Huan finished speaking, all the cultivators present exchanged glances with each other. At this time, they did not know whether to help Bailey Hongzhuang or Chu Yingfei. In their eyes, Bailey Hongzhuang had done the right thing from the beginning to the end. On the contrary, Chu Yingfei had been causing trouble. However, it wouldn't be long before Bailey Hongzhuang left Limitless Palace and would no longer have the slightest intersection with them. However, Chu Yingfei would always stay here. If they chose to stand on Bailey Hongzhuang's side now, they were afraid that Chu Yingfei would continue to cause trouble for them in the following days. They were not afraid of Chu Yingfei, but they hated this kind of trouble. This point could be seen from Chu Yingfei's unrelenting attitude. They hoped that someone would tell the truth, but they did not want to hear it from their own mouths. After seeing everyone's attitude, Su Huan was even more certain in his heart. Pei Yifan, tell me, who is telling the truth about this matter? Among all the disciples, Pei Yifan had the most honest personality. As an elder, Su Huan had a certain understanding of the disciples' personalities. No matter what the situation was, Pei Yifan would never lie. It was precisely because of this that Su Huan thought highly of Pei Yifan. As a cultivator, the most important thing was to put all of their thoughts on cultivation. The honest Pei Yifan was undoubtedly much better than some cultivators who only knew how to use crooked methods. As an elder of Limitless Palace, Su Huan had seen countless outstanding disciples over the years. Only cultivators who were straightforward and simple-minded could go far on the path of cultivation. When she heard Su Huan ask Pei Yifan about this matter, Chu Yingfei's expression turned ugly. He believed that many cultivators would not speak of this matter, except for Pei Yifan. Pei Yifan had already expressed his attitude long ago. Of course, he was on Bailey Hongzhuang's side. Su Huan was almost certain that once Pei Yifan spoke, he would tell the truth. Elder Su, I saw this matter from the beginning to the end. Bailey Hongzhuang's speeds was fast. That Bailey is Ing. Pei Yifan bowed deeply and said respectfully. As soon as Pei Yifan finished speaking, the expressions on the cultivators' faces changed. Their judgment was right, no matter when Pei Yifan spoke the truth. After Bailey Hongzhuang saw that Pei Yifan did not hesitate to stand by her side, there was a touch of appreciation in her eyes. Chapter 1886. In Bailey Hongzhuang's opinion, as long as she spread the word about what happened today, it would be a piece of cake to solve this problem. However, since she was already cultivating in Wuji Palace, she should rely on her own strength to deal with everything. She did not want to trouble others because of this. After all, she came to Wuji Palace to learn from her master. She needed to prove her strength and ability through this performance. If she wanted to become the successor of Wuji Palace in the future, not only did she need to be strong enough, but she also needed to be able to handle things well. This was the only way she could shoulder the heavy responsibility. After hearing Pei Yifan's answer, Su Huan understood everything. He could not help but look at Chu Yingfei. It seemed like the truth was out. Sensing Su Heshuan's gaze, Chewing Fei knew that something was wrong. She had been cultivating with Su Heshuan for a long time, so she had a certain understanding of Su Heshuan's character. She noticed that Su Heshuan's gaze was filled with warning and displeasure. Obviously, Su Heshuan believed that Pei Yifan was better than her under such circumstances. Chewing Fei was displeased when she thought of this. If Pei Yifan did not stand up and ruin her plans, the outcome of this matter would not be certain. If Elder Su really wanted to punish her, she would at least make Pei Yifan suffer. Elder Su, Pei Yifan has his own selfish motives. That's why he said such things. He's completely distorting the truth. Pei Yifan said anxiously. He looked at Su Heshuan agitatedly, and his voice was filled with anger. Without waiting for Su Heshuan to speak, Chewing Fei continued. Pei Yifan has taken a liking to Bailey Hongzhuang since the beginning, so he's trying his best to speak up for Bailey Hongzhuang. First Elder, you can't just listen to Pei Yifan's side of the story. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Chewing Fei's hypocritical and pretentious appearance and could not help but shake her head. It was truly shameful to be so shameless. Chewing Fei, you've been distorting the truth from the beginning to the end. How dare you insult Pei Yifan? You've gone too far. Bailey Hongzhuang frowned slightly. For someone like Chewing Fei, even saying another word would make people feel disgusted. Su Heshuan glanced at Bailey Hongzhuang. Then his gaze landed on Chewing Fei. He said, Chewing Fei, since things have reached this point, don't quibble anymore. Hearing Su Heshuan's words, Chu Yunfei couldn't help but be startled. He didn't think Elder Su would judge everything like this. I already know what exactly is going on. Don't bully others just because you are a core disciple of Limitless Palace. If this happens again, you will be punished. Su Heshuan's voice was filled with dignity and vigilance, making it impossible for others to have the heart to resist. Chewing Fei, who originally wanted to say more, fell into silence after hearing Su Heshuan's words. Her expression revealed a bit of awkwardness. Limitless Palace has never allowed disciples to fight in private. If you're really dissatisfied, you can go to the life and death arena to fight to the death. Su Heshuan's last sentence was obviously for Bailey Hongzhuang to hear. Chapter 1887. Moreover, this matter was Chewing Fei's fault. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't do anything wrong. If there was really a grudge between the two, it wasn't impossible to go to the life and death arena to determine the winner. No matter what, Chewing Fei's sneak attack on others was really wrong. You are punished with 3 months of cultivation resources. Su Heshuan said slowly. As Su Heshuan's voice fell, Chewing Fei's face instantly became ugly. She didn't expect that after Elder Su appeared, not only did Bailey Hongzhuang not receive any punishment, but she also lost 3 months of cultivation resources. One had to know that core disciples had a lot of cultivation resources every month. It was extremely important for them. Her strength was not considered a powerful existence among the core disciples. In addition, in these 3 months, she didn't have any cultivation resources, but others did. In this situation, she was afraid that when the time came, she would be too far away to catch up with everyone. This was something she definitely didn't want to see. However, looking at Elder Su's firm attitude, it was obvious that there was no room for negotiation. Chewing Fei's heart was depressed to the extreme. The gaze she looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with was full of hatred. If it wasn't for Bailey Hongzhuang, how could she have fallen to such a state? For cultivators, the most important thing was to improve their strength. Especially among the core disciples, the competition was particularly fierce. As long as one was slightly slower, it would be difficult to catch up with others. During this period of time, she had been working hard to catch up with others. However, everyone's strength was extremely powerful. Even if she worked hard, it was useless. Now that she lost 3 months of cultivation resources, she was afraid that she would be completely left behind by others. If she was careless, she might even be kicked out of the core disciple list. This was definitely not what she wanted to see. When she successfully became a core disciple, it could be said that she had unlimited glory. In the history of Limitless Palace, there were also some core disciples who were kicked out of the core disciple list because of poor performance. Such people often became the joke of Limitless Palace's disciples. They were even more miserable than cultivators who had never been a core disciple. Su Ishuang glanced at Bailey Hongzhuang and Chu Yingfei and said, "Do you have any objections?" Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head slightly and bowed respectfully. "I will follow Elder's arrangement." She had no objections to Elder Su's punishment. In fact, many elders would make the same choice when faced with such a situation. When Elder Su spoke earlier, he had already pointed out a clear path for her. If she wanted to take revenge, it was not impossible. As long as she invited Chu Yingfei to the life and death arena, it would be enough. Based on the fact that Elder Su had told her this, she knew that Elder Su treated her well. Otherwise, Elder Su would not have specially reminded her of this. Although Chu Yingfei had a lot of dissatisfaction in her heart, she didn't dare to say anything at this time. She could only nod her head, indicating that she had no objections. Seeing that no one had any objections, Elder Su left. Soon, his figure disappeared from everyone's sight. It was only after Elder Su left that the crowd of cultivators present became less restrained and returned to their previous natural state. Chapter 1888. She brought this upon herself. It's best if she is kicked out of the core disciple list. I think this Chu Yingfei's ability to distort the truth is really amazing. Fortunately, Pei Yifan spoke up for Bailey Hongzhuang this time. Otherwise, Bailey Hongzhuang wouldn't be able to explain herself. Fortunately, Chu Yingfei didn't bother us this time. Otherwise, it would be really bad. The group of cultivators nodded. The last thing they wanted to see was this kind of feeling of being harassed by a scoundrel. Just looking at what Chu Yingfei did before, they felt that this was really a scoundrel's behavior. If it was an ordinary person, it would be impossible for them to confuse right and wrong. Although Chu Yingfei didn't find trouble with him this time, no one knew if this kind of thing would happen to them next time. If this kind of thing happened to them, it would really make them feel an indescribable sense of disgust. Chu Yingfei looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and Pei Yifan hatefully. Her eyes flashed with resentment and malice. "Don't be complacent. We'll see about this matter. There will be plenty of time in the future. I will definitely make you pay the price. Up to you. I'm just afraid that you won't have a chance." Bailey Hongzhuang said coldly and looked at Chu Yingfei with disdain. With Chu Yingfei's despicable means, she didn't care to compare with her. Bailey Hongzhuang's words were very cold, but when it fell into Chu Yingfei's ears, it became arrogance and flaunting. She couldn't help but stare at Bailey Hongzhuang. "Bailey Hongzhuang, you don't have anything to be proud of. If you weren't a step faster, you would have already died in my hands. Now, Elder Su is still on my side. He only punished me with 3 months of cultivation resources. Your life is only worth 3 months of my cultivation resources." Chu Yingfei looked at Bailey Hongzhuang proudly. Although she was punished today, from Elder Su's attitude, she could see that Bailey Hongzhuang wasn't a big deal. In the future, she would have plenty of opportunities to deal with Bailey Hongzhuang. There was no need to rush. Bailey Hongzhuang sneered and looked at Chu Yingfei coldly. "Didn't anyone tell you not to provoke people you can't afford to provoke?" Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a cold smile. She faintly looked at Chu Yingfei, her eyes filled with ridicule and mockery. "Originally, I wanted to end this matter after you apologized. However, since you don't know how to appreciate favors, I don't mind letting you experience the taste of pain." Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Chu Yingfei couldn't help but frown. She didn't understand what Bailey Hongzhuang meant. However, looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's strange expression, she could not help but have an ominous premonition. Bailey Hongzhuang had always been very indifferent. Now that she suddenly said such words, it was really not in line with her style. Chu Yingfei only felt that there must be something fishy about this. Things were definitely not so simple. Everyone's eyes focused on Bailey Hongzhuang. Previously, Bailey Hongzhuang had never shown any abnormalities. Even when Chu Yingfei slandered her, Bailey Hongzhuang still didn't show too much anger or anything else. Chapter 1889. Bailey Hongzhuang, stop putting on an act. Chu Yingfei sneered. Although she faintly felt that something was wrong, she did not believe that Bailey Hongzhuang could do anything. She had already thought about it. Even if Bailey Hongzhuang invited her to the life and death ring, she would ignore it. As long as she ignored it, Bailey Hongzhuang could not do anything. Moreover, Elder Su was not far away. If Bailey Hongzhuang really dared to do something now, Elder Su would definitely appear immediately. In the next moment, under everyone's puzzled gaze, Bailey Hongzhuang directly snapped her fingers. After doing this, Bailey Hongzhuang directly turned and walked towards Wind Canyon. All of this was Chu Yingfei's own fault. Let her have a taste of her own medicine. When everyone saw Bailey Hongzhuang turn and leave just like that, their faces were filled with surprise. They did not understand what Bailey Hongzhuang was doing. Was she just teasing them? Chu Yingfei sneered as she looked at Bailey Hongzhuang's back. She knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was just bluffing. Because of what she said before, Bailey Hongzhuang had no way to refute it at all. Pei Hongzhuang's gaze also fell on Bailey Hongzhuang's back. He still could not understand what Bailey Hongzhuang said at the end. Although today was the first time he saw Bailey Hongzhuang, from all the things that happened before, Bailey Hongzhuang was definitely not a person who spoke arrogant words. Since she said something like that, then there must be something wrong. Otherwise, what was the meaning behind Bailey Hongzhuang's sudden snap? Self-righteous. She's just a foreign cultivator. She really thinks she's someone. Chu Yingfei sneered and immediately prepared to leave Wind Canyon. What had happened before had really made her lose face, and she didn't want to stay here any longer. It would be best if she went back to rest for a few days and then came back. Presumably, everyone would have forgotten about this matter. What did Bailey Hongzhuang mean by what she said before? It's really confusing. According to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, she is someone Chu Yingfei can't afford to offend. However, since she said such words, Chu Yingfei should be punished. However, Bailey Hongzhuang left just like that. Chu Yingfei would not be affected at all. I don't understand. Could it really be as Chu Yingfei said, Bailey Hongzhuang was just bluffing? Everyone was puzzled. Bailey Hongzhuang's current actions really made them unable to make sense of it. However, right at the moment when Chu Yingfei was preparing to leave, a scream suddenly sounded from her mouth. Chu Yingfei Hongzhuang screamed. Her originally complacent face was instantly filled with paleness and pain. Chu Yingfei Hongzhuang felt an indescribable pain coming from her body. It was as if her internal organs were being bitten by tens of thousands of insects. It was unbearably painful. The pain came from all four limbs. It was impossible to get rid of it. She did not even know where the pain came from. No matter if it was her mind or her body, there was an indescribable pain. In a short period of time, Chu Yingfei's body was covered in cold sweat. Under the intense pain, she was unable to continue. She fell to the ground and curled into a ball. Chapter 1890. Chu Yingfei curled up on the ground. Her clothes were soaked in sweat in a short period of time. She couldn't help but twitch. Her teeth bit her lips tightly. Her hands were clenched into fists. Blue veins protruded. She was obviously in great pain. This kind of intense pain was enough to drive Chu Yingfei crazy. She had never felt such great pain before. This kind of pain that came from her limbs and bones made her feel that her entire body was on the verge of collapse. At this moment, Chu Yingfei couldn't help but think of Bailey Hongzhuang's actions before. Could it be? The reason why she was in such pain was completely because of Bailey Hongzhuang? When this scene flashed through Chu Yingfei's mind, she felt that it must be like this. If it wasn't for Bailey Hongzhuang, how could she become like this for no reason? Bailey Hongzhuang. Chu Yingfei gritted her teeth and called out Bailey Hongzhuang's name. However, under the influence of this intense pain, it was very difficult for her to even say a word. After everyone heard Chu Yingfei's words, they all reacted. Could it be that this was the punishment that Bailey Hongzhuang said before? However, they had never seen Bailey Hongzhuang use any methods from the beginning to the end. In fact, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't even get close to Chu Yingfei. Then why did Chu Yingfei become like this now? Not only that, but after Bailey Hongzhuang left, Chu Yingfei suddenly fell into such intense pain. What kind of method was this? Although everyone couldn't understand how Bailey Hongzhuang did all this, they were still certain that this matter was definitely related to Bailey Hongzhuang. If it wasn't for Bailey Hongzhuang definitely wouldn't have said such inexplicable words. At this moment, everyone suddenly felt that Bailey Hongzhuang was a cultivator that couldn't be provoked. This was because her methods were truly frightening. Chewing Fei's current situation was not faked. Everyone could imagine what kind of pain it was to be able to make her suffer so much. If such a thing happened to them, they probably wouldn't be able to bear it. Oh my God, what did Bailey Hongzhuang do to Chewing Fei? Why did Chewing Fei become like this? It's too shocking. I don't know. I didn't see Bailey Hongzhuang do anything. She only snapped her fingers, and Chewing Fei became like this. It's really hard to understand. No wonder Bailey Hongzhuang was so calm when faced with Chewing Fei's mockery. At this moment, everyone understood what was going on. Because they didn't know what method Bailey Hongzhuang had used. Perhaps it was because they didn't understand that they felt that Bailey Hongzhuang's method was even more strange. Bailey Hongzhuang could completely turn them into this state without anyone noticing. Under such pain, Chewing Fei couldn't bear it. After struggling for a moment, she realized that the pain didn't subside at all. Instead, it became more and more intense. She couldn't help but say to everyone, Bailey Hongzhuang, help me find Bailey Hongzhuang. Since this was done by Bailey Hongzhuang, only Bailey Hongzhuang could help her get rid of it. Chapter 1891. Everyone panicked after hearing Chewing Fei's words. They had never seen such a strange thing. Until now, when Chewing Fei called out Bailey Hongzhuang's name. At this time, only Bailey Hongzhuang could save her from this pain. Everyone's eyes couldn't help but turn to Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang had already walked into Wind Canyon. Just looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's back as she left, everyone understood that Bailey Hongzhuang didn't plan to pay attention to Chewing Fei at all. After all, when Bailey Hongzhuang left, Chewing Fei still had an arrogant look on her face. Now that she had fallen into such a situation, she only thought of begging Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang probably wouldn't pay attention to her at all. Thinking of what she did to Bailey Hongzhuang before, how excessive was that? If it were them, they wouldn't pay attention to Chewing Fei at all under such circumstances. One had to know that Chewing Fei wanted Bailey Hongzhuang's life before. I beg you help me find Bailey Hongzhuang. Chewing Fei struggled to look at the cultivators around her. Fine beads of sweat kept flowing from her forehead, and her hair was also wet. Under such intense pain, she only felt that it took all her strength to say a word. Everyone looked at each other. Although they didn't have a good impression of Chewing Fei, looking at Chewing Fei's painful appearance, they were really worried that Chewing Fei would die from the pain. If Chewing Fei died like this, they would probably be implicated. Pei Yifan frowned as he looked at Chewing Fei. He had to admit that Bailey Hongzhuang's methods were really amazing. What method did she use to make people suffer to such an extent? Most importantly, everything had happened in front of their eyes. They had seen everything clearly, and there was no chance for them to do anything. However, now that things had developed to this point, he couldn't just watch Chewing Fei die from pain like this. In the next moment, Pei Yifan immediately walked in the direction of Wind Canyon. If Bailey Hongzhuang only punished Chewing Fei like this, it would be fine. However, if Chewing Fei lost her life like this, it wouldn't be appropriate. Everyone wasn't surprised when they saw Pei Yifan go to Bailey Hongzhuang. With Pei Yifan's character, he had always helped the gift and not the person. This method was very in line with his character. Bailey Hongzhuang tried her best to control the energy in her body, to be adjusted, to find the most accurate method. However, it was fortunate that she had at least found a direction. Chewing Fei, that kind should be taught a lesson. Earlier, she had already poisoned Chewing Fei when she kidnapped Chu Yu's. However, if there wasn't another type of poison powder to fuse with, it wouldn't have any effect on Chewing Fei. Ing Fei Hongzhuang. Tia Hongzhuang she's, was she Bailey Zhuang? Normally, No one among the core disciples of Limitless Palace could teach Chu Yingfei a lesson. That was why Chu Yingfei was so arrogant. Logically speaking, with Chu Yingfei's personality of creating trouble out of nothing, she should be very annoying. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang slowly walked to the front of Wind Canyon, Pei Yifan quickly appeared beside her. Chapter 1892. Pei Yifan stopped talking halfway. He understood that with Bailey Hongzhuang's position, there was no need to pay attention to Chu Yingfei. Bailey Hongzhuang glanced at Pei Yifan. It seemed that her judgment of Pei Yifan was right. Pei Yifan was not only upright, but also kind. Chu Yingfei had also insulted Pei Yifan before. Now that Chu Yingfei was in such a state, Pei Yifan was still pleading for Chu Yingfei. She really didn't know whether to say that Prime Minister Pei Yifan was magnanimous or that he was too stupid. With Chu Yingfei's personality, even if Pei Yifan helped her now, she wouldn't remember Pei Yifan's kindness once she recovered. On the contrary, she might hate Pei Yifan even more. She couldn't stand the fact that she had to seek help from the person she hated the most. With her petty personality, it was normal for her to do such an ungrateful thing. What does her fate have to do with me? Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyes slightly and looked at Pei Yifan with a faint smile. She never thought of herself as a good person. Perhaps she didn't want to kill cultivators who were remorseful, but she wouldn't give people like Chu Yingfei any chance. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Pei Yifan was slightly taken aback. His expression was complicated. From Bailey Hongzhuang's previous behavior, he could tell that Bailey Hongzhuang was a woman who knew how to repay kindness. People like her wouldn't have a bad personality. Without thinking, he could understand why Bailey Hongzhuang chose to do this. Therefore, after hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's question, he didn't know what to say. No matter what, it was Bailey Hongzhuang's freedom. He couldn't force Bailey Hongzhuang to do it. This isn't the life and death ring. If Chu Yingfei dies here, it will affect you negatively, Pei Yifan said. The reason why he said this was not to save Chu Yingfei, but because this matter really had a big impact on Bailey Hongzhuang. Elder Su had just left, and before he left, he had already told Bailey Hongzhuang about this matter. If Chu Yingfei died now, then the situation would be very bad. Seeing Pei Yifan's frown and worry, Bailey Hongzhuang chuckled and said, "Don't worry. She won't die. It's just a life worse than death." A cold look flashed in Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes. With Chu Yingfei's personality, as long as she stayed with him in the future, there would be endless trouble. She had to make sure Chu Yingfei Hongzhuang completely disappear from her sight. As long as Bailey Hongzhuang's, it wouldn't be too much of a problem. As long as Chess Life was, it would be fine. As long as Hongzhuang's SE believed that Bailey Hongzhuang was telling the truth and wasn't lying to him. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang continued to walk into Wind Canyon. She wanted Chu Yingfei to taste the price of offending her, so she naturally wouldn't help her. Pei Yifan didn't say much. From Bailey Hongzhuang's attitude, he could tell what she was thinking. No matter what, Bailey Hongzhuang wouldn't let Chu Yingfei go. As long as her life wasn't in danger, a punishment was nothing. Chapter 1893. Although Chu Yingfei was rolling on the ground in pain, her gaze was still fixed on the wind ravine. When she saw Pei Yifan walking back alone, her pale face couldn't help but turn a little unsightly. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't come back. Didn't this mean that she couldn't be free from this pain? When the core disciples saw Pei Yifan come back alone, they all looked at each other in dismay. They already had some guesses in their hearts. Like I said, Bailey Hongzhuang has a fiery temper. Bailey Hongzhuang definitely won't let Chu Yingfei off after what she did to her before. Bailey Hongzhuang doesn't need to be afraid of Chu Yingfei at all. It's reasonable for her to do this now. This time Chu Yingfei is really unlucky. Of all the times to make her presence known, she just had to do it on Bailey Hongzhuang. She's really looking for her own death. Everyone only felt that it was very funny. This turn of events was really quite dramatic. However, through Chu Yingfei's actions, they also knew that Bailey Hongzhuang wasn't an existence that could be easily bullied. Pei Yifan quickly walked in front of Chu Yingfei. Chu Yingfei stared at Pei Yifan and said, You, and her. What did you say? Although Chu Ying-fei hated Pei Yifan very much, when she said these words, she didn't have the slightest bit of momentum. Under this kind of intense pain, she only felt that all her strength was quickly dissipating. She won't come, Pei Yifan said slowly. He only looked at Chu Ying-fei with an indifferent gaze. For someone like Chu Ying-fei, it was really impossible to gain the goodwill of others. Did you do it on purpose? Chu Ying-fei looked at Pei Yifan angrily. Now, she hated Pei Yifan to the extreme. Previously, if Pei Yifan didn't suddenly stand up for Bailey Hongzhuang, things wouldn't have turned out like this. No matter how much she ridiculed Bailey Hongzhuang wouldn't say anything. Naturally, these things wouldn't have happened. In her opinion, it was very likely that Pei Yifan had deliberately prevented Bailey Hongzhuang from coming. If I die here, none of you will have an easy time. Chu Ying-fei gritted her teeth. Every word was squeezed out from between her teeth. Looking at Chu Ying-fei's current state, Pei Yifan secretly shook his head. It was impossible for anyone to pity her. A pitiful person must have something to hate. Bailey Hongzhuang wasn't wrong. Bailey Hongzhuang said you won't die, Pei Yifan said slowly. As soon as Pei Yifan finished speaking, the expressions on the cultivators' faces changed. From Pei Yifan's words, everyone could already be sure that this was Bailey Hongzhuang's doing. If it wasn't Bailey Hongzhuang who did it, then how could she be sure that Chu Ying-fei wouldn't die? After Chu Ying-fei knew that she wouldn't die, she let out a sigh of relief. As long as she was still alive, it was fine. Cultivators who had reached their level were all people who cherished their lives. If they continued to work hard now, they would have a bright future ahead of them. Even if they didn't work hard now, they would be treated well in any kingdom. How could they bear to leave such a beautiful life? Hurry up and get Bailey Hongzhuang to relieve my pain, Chu Ying-fei shouted. Chapter 1894. Looking at Chu Ying-fei's self-righteous appearance, Pei Yifan shook his head and didn't want to bother with her anymore. Even now, Chu Ying-fei still didn't repent. Thinking about it, it would be even more impossible in the future. Since that was the case, why should he bother with her? Thinking of this, Pei Yifan didn't even look at Chu Ying-fei. He turned around and walked towards the depths of Wind Canyon. He still needed to cultivate. He didn't have time to waste on Chu Ying-fei. Chu Ying-fei had lost 3 months of cultivation resources. She was destined to not be able to keep up with their cultivation pace. Perhaps after 3 months, there would already be other core disciples replacing Chu Ying-fei. Seeing Pei Yifan turn around and leave, Chu Ying-fei's expression instantly became ugly. Under the intense pain, she wanted to reach out and grab Pei Yifan, but she didn't have any strength at all. Just as Chu Ying-fei grabbed Pei Yifan's trousers, Pei Yifan's figure moved and directly shook off Chu Ying-fei's hand. Pei Yifan's figure slowly disappeared from Chu Ying-fei's sight. Chu Ying-fei's eyes were also filled with despair. Pei Yifan left very decisively without the slightest hesitation. Since Bailey Hongzhuang already said that Chu Ying-fei wouldn't die, then there was no need to care. After everyone saw Pei Yifan leave like this, their expressions became very interesting. Pei Yifan had always been an upright and plain-spoken person. Usually when he saw someone in need, he would lend a helping hand. However, now that Chu Ying-fei was in so much pain, Pei Yifan chose to leave. This was enough to prove how much Pei Yifan hated Chu Ying-fei. Following Pei Yifan's departure, everyone hesitated for a moment before leaving one after another. As for Chu Ying-fei, they didn't have any plans to help. Soon, everyone disappeared in front of Chu Ying-fei. Seeing everyone leave like this, Chu Ying-fei's expression became even more ugly. Compared to the despair before, there was a bit of panic. She didn't know whether Bailey Hongzhuang's words about not dying was true or false. If it was false, then she really couldn't keep her life. In the sect, the cultivators respected the cultivators with strength the most. Regardless of your age or background, as long as you have enough strength, they will respect you. Although it was Bailey Hongzhuang's first time at Limitless Palace, her previous performance was enough to gain everyone's respect. When the elemental energy in Bailey Hongzhuang's body was depleted in the Wind Canyon. She walked out of the Wind Canyon and continued to meditate and recover her elemental energy. Bailey Hongzhuang had already walked out of Wind Canyon and saw that Chu Yingfei had already fainted on the ground. Her gaze paused on Chu Yingfei for a moment, then quickly shifted away. Chu Yingfei's situation was not out of her expectations. She wanted to punish Chu Yingfei, which was why Chu Yingfei suffered so much pain. Ordinary people would not be able to endure such pain, and fainting was an extremely normal thing. When Chu Yingfei woke up, the pain would disappear. However, the most important side effect would also appear. Anyone who offended her would not have a good ending. The punishment Bailey Hongzhuang wanted to give Chu Yingfei was not just pain, but after Chu Yingfei woke up, she would constantly find that her cultivation was regressing in the following days. Chapter 1895. This was the most important use. She believed that Chu Yingfei would definitely collapse when she saw her degenerating process. For someone like Chu Yingfei, this was the only way to punish her sufficiently. Time passed very quickly in the process of cultivation. Not long after, it was already evening. Chu Yingfei only slowly woke up at this moment. The pain from before was too exhausting, so she slept for such a long time before she could wake up. When Chu Yingfei woke up, she only felt that her entire body was exhausted. Looking at the red clouds that filled the sky, her eyes couldn't help but be filled with shock. She was a little confused and didn't understand what was going on. This confusion only lasted for a short period of time. Chu Yingfei quickly understood. The cultivators in the Wind Canyon were preparing to leave as it was getting late. Originally, everyone was still a little hesitant. Should they bring Chu Yingfei with them or leave Chu Yingfei here? Fortunately, Chu Yingfei just happened to wake up now, so they didn't have to think about this problem. After seeing that she didn't die, Chu Yingfei heaved a sigh of relief. Her gaze turned slightly, and her gaze quickly stopped on Bailey Hongzhuang. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang again, Chu Yingfei couldn't help but gnash her teeth. If it wasn't for Bailey Hongzhuang, how could she have fallen to such a state? He actually fainted in front of everyone. This could be said to be extremely humiliating. She slowly stood up and looked angrily at Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang, what did you do to me? Chu Yingfei raised her voice and said angrily. The bone-deep hatred in her eyes seemed to be able to burn Bailey Hongzhuang to ashes. Hearing Chu Yingfei's question, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't care at all. She indifferently glanced at Chu Yingfei and mocked. You don't even understand what happened, and you have the face to ask me? After saying that, Bailey Hongzhuang no longer paid attention to Chu Yingfei. She turned around and walked towards the palace. She had been cultivating in Wind Canyon for an entire day. Bewitching and the three beasts must be waiting for her. It was time for her to go back. Cultivation would take a long time, and it was not something that could be accomplished in a short period of time. When Chu Yingfei saw that Bailey Hongzhuang's attitude towards her was so cold and indifferent, she didn't even answer her question. That look of disdain made it seem as if even arguing with her was a waste of energy. The hatred in her eyes grew even stronger. I have stayed in Limitless Palace for so long, but I have never seen someone as arrogant as you. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's back, Chu Yingfei angrily shouted. Unfortunately, Bailey Hongzhuang left Chu Yingfei with an indifferent back view. Even after Chu Yingfei said those words, she didn't even turn her head and didn't stop walking. Seeing this, Chu Yingfei could only stomp her feet angrily. In fact, with her current situation, she didn't have the strength to find trouble with Bailey Hongzhuang. After she woke up, she only felt that her entire body was weak and powerless. It was difficult for her to even stand firmly, let alone find trouble. However, in Chu Yingfei's mind, there was still a long way to go. Chapter 1896. Of course, if Chu Yingfei knew what Bailey Hongzhuang had done to her, she would not be as optimistic as she was now. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly walked in the direction of the palace. Many core disciples saw Bailey Hongzhuang walk in the other direction, and their eyes were filled with surprise. Isn't Bailey Hongzhuang heading towards the palace master's sleeping quarters? Why is she going there? I don't know. The palace master brought Bailey Hongzhuang here this morning. Maybe she has some kind of relationship with the palace master. Chewing Fei treated Bailey Hongzhuang so badly. Do you think Bailey Hongzhuang will tell the palace master and his wife about this? Everyone's eyes flashed with curiosity. They were now very curious about Bailey Hongzhuang. Previously, when they knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was a cultivator from Tiangang's sect, they did not pay much attention to it. However, now that they saw Bailey Hongzhuang heading towards the palace master's sleeping quarters, they could not help but have other thoughts in their minds. Bailey Hongzhuang probably won't tell anyone about this. Pei Yifan slowly said. For many cultivators, there was no need to tell others about this matter that they could solve with their own strength. Following Pei Yifan's words, the rest of the cultivators could not help but look at Pei Yifan. Today, among all the people present, Pei Yifan and Bailey Hongzhuang's relationship was the closest. However, they also believed Pei Yifan's words. Bailey Hongzhuang knew that many cultivators were curious about the direction she left in. However, she did not intend to hide it. Currently, she was not clear about the other places in Limitless Palace. Therefore, she could not purposely go to other places just to hide her residence. Since her master and his wife did not arrange for her to stay in other places, it proved that there was no need to hide it. After Bailey Hongzhuang left to cultivate, Di Beichan stayed in the room to cultivate. The three beasts followed He Mu and wandered around the bedroom. After Yulinfeng and Nangong Wu sent Bailey Hongzhuang to the Wind Canyon to cultivate, they went to Bailey Hongzhuang's palace. Di Beichan obviously didn't need anything, but the three beasts needed a lot of food. Therefore, after Di Beichan told this to Yulinfeng and Nangong Wu, they sent people to prepare a lot of delicious food. After seeing the food, the three beasties felt as if they were in heaven. Now, not only did they have their own residence, but they also had an endless supply of delicious food. This was simply the life they had dreamed of. When Bailey Hongzhuang returned to the bedroom, she saw that Di Beichan and the three beasts were already waiting for her outside the bedroom. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang had returned, Di Beichan's face was instantly filled with a joyful smile. To the Kuranim, not seeing him for a day was like 3 years. Bailey Hongzhuang had only gone out to cultivate for a day, but he already missed her very much. It was just that he did not show it in front of others. "Master, you're back." Xiaohe leaped and rushed in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. Her furry face was filled with an excited smile. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and stroked Xiaohe's furry head. It felt good to the touch. Chapter 1897. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Xiaohe nodded repeatedly and said, "Of course. Master is now the young palace master of Limitless Palace. We can't lose face for Master." Xiaobai had already moved in front of Bailey Hongzhuang at this moment. Her round and bright eyes were filled with curiosity. "Master, how are the results of your cultivation today?" They were really curious about the palace master's cultivation with Bailey Hongzhuang. What kind of cultivation was this? What kind of benefits would it bring to Master? This cultivation has some benefits for me. However, I'm afraid I won't be able to master it in a short period of time. It'll take some time before it's possible. Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. "I see." White Lion scurried in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. As its body grew bigger, it could no longer pounce on Bailey Hongzhuang directly. If it wasn't careful, it could directly push Bailey Hongzhuang down. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the three active beasties in front of her. The smile in her eyes gradually deepened. Because of Chewing Fei's constant trouble today, she felt that it was a waste of time. Her heart was filled with dissatisfaction and displeasure. However, after seeing the three beasties, her originally bad mood quickly turned for the better. Di Beichan slowly walked in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. He held Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulder with one hand. His extraordinarily handsome face was filled with a moving smile. "Wife, you've been cultivating for the whole day. Has it been tiring?" He was very clear that when his master was training him in the past, he had suffered a lot. Thinking about it, The palace master of Limitless Palace was training Bailey Hongzhuang. This must be an extremely harsh task. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled up slightly. The coldness that was originally used to deal with Chu Yingfei had instantly turned into infinite tenderness after meeting Bewitching. "It's all right, it's not that hard," Bailey Hongzhuang replied. The situation in the Wind Canyon was a lot easier than she had expected. However, this Wind Canyon was only the first test for her cultivation of the Limitless method. She wasn't very clear about what would happen after that. At present, she could only take one step at a time and complete one test after another. "Let's go eat first and replenish some nutrients." A faint smile appeared on Bewitching's face. "Just in time. You can also tell me about today's cultivation." Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded and smiled. "Okay." After hearing the words "dinner together," the eyes of the three beasts immediately lit up. Eating was the happiest thing for them. Bailey Hongzhuang had been constantly exhausting her essence energy today to recover her essence energy. Now that she heard Bewitching's words, she felt a pang of hunger in her stomach. This kind of cultivation consumption wasn't small. It seemed to consume essence energy, but it also consumed a certain amount of the body. When He Mu, who was not far away, saw Bewitching and Bailey Hongzhuang getting along so warmly, a smile appeared in his eyes. In the past, he rarely saw the young master reveal so many expressions. Ever since the young master's wife appeared, this situation had completely changed. Now that he saw the young master's happy appearance every day, he was really happy for the young master. The young master would only truly feel happy when the young master's wife was around. He only hoped that the young master's wife could always be by the young master's side. This way, the young master could always be happy. Chapter 1898. While they were talking, Bailey Hongzhuang also told Bewitching about what happened today. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Bewitching couldn't help but frown. If that's the case, that Chu Yingfei is really finding trouble with you everywhere. A mere core disciple actually dared to find trouble with his wife? Bewitching's eyes couldn't help but be filled with a hint of coldness. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. "It's nothing. I've already punished her. I believe that it won't be long before she disappears from the ranks of the core disciples." Most of the time, dealing with a person didn't require any obvious means. The reason why one had to defeat the opponent directly was because one valued or respected the opponent. However, for someone like Chu Yingfei, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't need to spend so much effort. As long as she used a little trick, she could make Chu Yingfei disappear. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, Bewitching also saw Bailey Hongzhuang's confident look. He was very clear about what kind of means his wife had. From when he first met Bailey Hongzhuang until now, the methods Bailey Hongzhuang used could be said to be endless. As long as his wife had the intention to deal with it, it was undoubtedly a simple matter. For that kind of annoying person, you should ruthlessly teach her a lesson. Xiaohei puffed up her cheeks angrily. This Chu Yingfei really didn't know what to do. She actually dared to take the initiative to find trouble with Master. "I think that we should follow Master to cultivate today. That Chu Yingfei is so annoying. If we're here, she won't be able to reason with us." Xiaobai curled its lips. It understood its master's temperament. Under normal circumstances, its master would be too lazy to waste her breath on others, unless it was a direct confrontation. At this time, their existence was needed. After all, they had nothing to do. Arguing was also one of their pleasures. "Tomorrow, we'll follow Master to the Wind Canyon to cultivate," Baisher said. Master couldn't violate Wuji Palace's rules and directly kill Chu Yingfei. However, it was only a beast. Even if it killed Chu Yingfei, it had nothing to do with its master. After all, beasts also had times when they went crazy. Hearing Baisher's words, Xiaohei and Xiaobai both nodded. They had been staying in the house cultivating these days, and there was no point in doing so. It would be more interesting to go out with their master. Looking at the three beasts' indignant looks, Bailey said, "You don't have to be like this. I don't care about this kind of thing. This kind of thing doesn't matter." When she was at a level, she had completely facing other people, causing a farce, causing a Hongzhuang creating. We don't care, we're going anyway. The three beasts said in unison. Tomorrow, they wanted to see what kind Chu Ya use. They. Otherwise, they'll get fatter and fatter if they keep staying in the palace. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows. Looking carefully, the three bees had indeed gained quite a bit of weight these days. They stayed in the palace all day and only ate. Going out to cultivate for a while was not a bad choice. Chapter 1899. Bewitching smiled as he looked at the three beasties. However, he had his own thoughts in his mind. He understood Hongzhuang's character. Most of the time, Hongzhuang would not care about other people's attacks. However, he could not bear to see someone attack Hongzhuang, even if it was just words. He was a young sect master of Tiangang sect. With his status, he naturally could not cultivate with Hongzhuang. Therefore, as long as the three beasties were by Hongzhuang's side, he could rest assured. The three beasties were also masters who wished for the world to be in chaos. In terms of bickering, there was probably no one who could beat them. Moreover, the three beasties were not weak. If they wanted to fight, they did not need to worry. Since that's the case, then all of you can cultivate with me tomorrow. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. In the past, the three beasties had always been by her side. Ever since the assessment competition, the three beasties had often been separated from her. Now that the three beasties were going to cultivate with her again, she was equally happy. After all, the three beasties were extremely close to her. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, the three beasties' eyes were filled with excitement. That's great! Xiao He, Xiao Bai, and Bai Shi exclaimed excitedly. They had long been secretly thinking in their hearts that they would go to Wind Canyon tomorrow to see what kind of person Chewing Fei was. After dinner, Bailey Hongzhuang only felt a thick and warm atmosphere. This kind of feeling really made people reluctant to leave. She really hoped that they could continue living like this in the future. After dinner, Bailey Hongzhuang prepared to return to her room to rest. However, just as she was about to return to her room to rest, Great Elder Gu Taihong suddenly came. Seeing Gu Taihong's appearance, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes could not help but be filled with a hint of doubt. A smile bloomed on her face. Great Elder, why are you here? Young Palace Master. Gu Taihong bowed towards Bailey Hongzhuang. Now, Bailey Hongzhuang was the young Palace Master of Limitless Palace. Therefore, there was no problem with his address. Bailey Hongzhuang's expression changed slightly, but she didn't say anything. Bewitching's eyes were filled with a faint smile. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang had obtained the recognition of Limitless Palace, he felt happy for Hongzhuang from the bottom of his heart. Although Hongzhuang had only just started cultivating with Yulin Feng, it was obvious that all of them were certain that Hongzhuang would be able to pass this test. The palace lord asked me to bring you to a place. Gu Taihong said slowly, his kind and amiable face rippling with a kind smile. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Although she didn't know where Elder Gu was taking her, since it was arranged by her master, it could be another form of improvement for her. After Bewitching knew about this matter, there was a hint of worry in his eyes. Bailey Hongzhuang had already cultivated in Wind Canyon for an entire day. She never thought that she would have to go out to cultivate again. It seemed that Yulin Feng intended to let Hongzhuang race against time to cultivate. Although he felt a little heartache in his heart, Bewitching did not show it on his face. After all, Bailey Hongzhuang wanted to become the successor of Limitless Palace. It was inevitable that she would have to undergo some tests. Moreover, Hongzhuang was now wholeheartedly focused on improving her cultivation. With such an opportunity, it was impossible for her to reject it. If young Sect Master D is interested, you can also come along. Gu Taihong smiled. Chapter 1900. As long as he could accompany Hongzhuang, it was enough to make Bewitching happy. No matter what kind of training it was, he could give some pointers by Hongzhuang's side. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a smile. Beichen specially accompanied her to Limitless Palace. If Beichen could accompany her, she would be very happy. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen preparing to leave together, the three beasts couldn't help but gather in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. Master, we want to go too. If they were not allowed to go, then they would enter the Chaos Ring. In this way, they would know what kind of training it was. Looking at the three beasts' fervent gazes, Bailey Hongzhuang understood that they really wanted to go and take a look. Gu Taihong already knew that these three beasts were Bailey Hongzhuang's contract beasts. Moreover, these three contract beasts' ranks were very high. At this moment, looking at the three beasts, the amazement in his eyes became even more intense. Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but look at Gu Taihong. She also didn't know if the three beasts could go. Gu Taihong thought for a moment, then said, "Then let's go together." Bailey Hongzhuang was now the young palace master of Limitless Palace. From the palace master's decision, it could be seen that the palace master had taught Bailey Hongzhuang everything without holding back. Since that was the case, contract beasts had always been the cultivator's most loyal companions. Therefore, there was no relationship at all. He believed that the palace master would think so too. After getting Gu Taihong's approval, the three beasts jumped up excitedly. They had just arrived at Limitless Palace and didn't know anything about Limitless Palace. It would be great if they had the opportunity to experience it. Under Gu Taihong's lead, Bailey Hongzhuang, Di Beichen, and the three beasts came to the depths of Limitless Palace. This place was extremely secretive. If it wasn't for Gu Taihong leading the way, they wouldn't have been able to come here. It was really surprising. From this secretive situation, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen could determine that this should be a secret place. Even in the entire Limitless Palace, not many people would know about it. Master, the elemental energy around here is much denser. Baisher sensed the surrounding situation and said slowly. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. She also felt it. Bailey Hongzhuang's spiritual power had always been very strong, and her perception of spiritual power was also very sharp. Therefore, not long after coming here, she had already sensed it. Not only that, but she also realized that the closer she was, the elemental energy was denser. A thought gradually appeared in Di Beichen's mind. Just like how he had a cultivation room in Tiangang's sex bedroom, Limitless Palace should also have such an existence. Perhaps, Palace Master, you had asked Bailey Hongzhuang to go to that cultivation room to cultivate. With that extremely dense elemental energy, cultivating here could achieve twice the result with half the effort. However, Princess E actually agreed to let him come along, which was really beyond his expectations. Logically speaking, this kind of thing was a secret of the sect and wouldn't be told to others at all. However, Palace Master Yu was actually so assured of him. It was clear that Palace Master Yu trusted him. However, Di Beichen was very clear in his heart. Since Palace Master Yu trusted him so much, he naturally couldn't let Palace Master Yu down. Chapter 1901. Young Palace Master, Young Sect Master D, it's here. You may enter. Gu Taihong bowed to Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen with a smile on his face. The Palace Master has instructed that young Palace Master should cultivate here at night. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Thank you for leading the way, Elder Gu. It's my duty. Gu Taihong smiled. Ever since he found out that Bailey Hongzhuang was the young sect master, Gu Taihong had grown to like Bailey Hongzhuang more and more after interacting with her. Not only did she not put on airs, but she was also exceptionally hardworking. Compared to the others, Bailey Hongzhuang was much stronger. After Gu Taihong left, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen looked at each other before the two of them walked into the palace. The palace was not very big. So far, this was the smallest palace that Bailey Hongzhuang had seen in Wuji Palace. As the palace doors slowly opened, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but look astonished when she saw the scene in front of her. Oh my God! Isn't this the stairway to heaven that we saw in the ruins back then? Xiao Hei could not help but exclaim. Wasn't this the stairway to heaven that they saw back then? It was exactly the same. There were no changes at all. Thinking back to when the stairway to heaven had disappeared, they felt depressed. If they could cultivate on the stairway to heaven for a period of time, it would be great. Unfortunately, after Master had obtained the inheritance, the stairway to heaven had disappeared as well. They never thought that they would see the stairway to heaven again today. It was simply too shocking. The stairway to heaven really does exist. Xiaohei was also in disbelief. If they could cultivate on the stairway to heaven, the speed of their cultivation would be astonishing. This treatment is too good. Baisher sighed. Although he relied on consuming monster crystals to increase his strength, cultivating in such an environment was also beneficial to him. Most importantly, if Master cultivated here, his strength would definitely increase extremely quickly. When Di Beichun saw the stairway to heaven, his usually calm face was filled with shock. This method was much better than the cultivation room in Tiangang sect. At this moment, Di Beichun finally understood why Palace Master Yu had suddenly risen to power. Her speed of improvement was beyond everyone's expectations. With such a powerful weapon, it would be difficult to slow down one's cultivation speed. Bailey Hongzhuang stared at the stairway to heaven in front of Beichun. She admired her master's method when she first saw the stairway to heaven. Back then, she felt that this stairway was not simulated because it was too difficult to simulate such an environment. It was simply impossible for an average person to simulate such a high concentration of essence energy. It was simply unbelievable. Now, after seeing the stairway to heaven now, she's understood. Which was why the stairway to Beichun's stairs had disappeared. Master actually allowed me to cultivate on the stairway to heaven. Then, my cultivation speed in these 2 months will definitely be twice the result with half the effort. She had already understood the density of the stairway to heaven. With her current ability, standing at the top of the stairway to cultivate was no problem at all. Whether it was her or Di Beichun, staying here to cultivate would allow them to improve very quickly. Chapter 1902. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun looked at each other. Their hearts were filled with gratitude towards Yulin Feng. Yulin Feng, being able to let them come here to cultivate, already expressed his trust in them. After all, the fact that Limitless Palace had such an existence was really enviable. Once this news was spread out, the stairway to heaven would be coveted by countless people. Limitless Palace would also become the target of public criticism. This action of Yulin Feng's was taking a huge risk. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun understood this point. Therefore, their gratitude towards Yulin Feng grew even stronger. Yulin Feng was willing to accept this risk. However, they would not let Yulin Feng make the wrong bet. Otherwise, they would not tell anyone about this matter. The three beasts naturally knew the importance of this matter. Therefore, they understood that they could not tell anyone about this matter. Bailey Hongzhuang immediately walked up the stairway to heaven. Ever since she came out of the ruins, she had never seen the stairway to heaven again. Now that she had the chance to climb the stairway to heaven again, she had a different kind of sigh in her heart. Di Beichun had heard about the mystical stairway to heaven before. Now that he saw it with his own eyes, he was even more shocked. All these years, as the young sect master of Tiangang sect, he had seen countless mystical things. However, ever since he saw Hongzhuang's chaos ring, he realized that the mystical things he had seen in the past were nothing. However, now that he saw the stairway to heaven in Limitless Palace, he felt that this stairway to heaven was also a rare treasure. No matter which cultivator, as long as they had the opportunity to cultivate on this stairway to heaven, it was equivalent to them having a cultivation cheat. Even if they did not have enough cultivation resources, under such rich elemental energy, it was definitely not something that ordinary people could compare with. If a cultivator with good conditions had the stairway to heaven, he was afraid that no one would be his opponent. Now that Hongzhuang could cultivate here, 3 months was equivalent to nearly 3 years of cultivation in the outside world. If Hongzhuang stayed in Limitless Palace for a longer period of time, it would not be difficult for her to defeat Lan Qingyan. Bailey Hongzhuang quickly reached the top of the stairway to heaven. Back then, she had already endured all kinds of pressure from the stairway to heaven. Therefore, it was not a big deal for her to endure it again. The current stairway to heaven did not need to withstand the previous test, so the pressure of the last two steps was not as shocking. What's more, they only needed to cultivate with sufficient elemental energy. They didn't need to reach the highest level. Bewitching also felt the pressure of each step of the stairway to heaven. He also understood the effort that Hong Zhuang had put in to climb up the stairway to heaven. It was definitely not something that could be described with the word difficult. After Bewitching and Bailey Hongzhuang reached the top of the stairway to heaven, Bewitching also felt the richness of the elemental energy. This elemental energy is so rich, it's really amazing. Bewitching's face could not hide the amazement on his face. He had heard about the magic of the stairway to heaven from Xia Jiqing before. It was not until now that he really saw it that he understood that everything Xia Jiqing said was true. It was even more magical than what Xia Jiqing said. Looking at Bewitching's amazed look, the smile on Bailey Hongzhuang's lips could not help but widen. Chapter 1903. If I can cultivate on this stairway of heaven, then the speed of improvement will be much faster than others. I think that this stairway of heaven might be a kind of divine weapon. Bewitching's eyes were filled with contemplation. Bailey Hongzhuang's chaos ring was extremely magical. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he would not have believed that such a divine weapon existed. The chaos ring had overturned all his previous understanding of divine weapons. Therefore, when he saw this stairway of heaven at this moment, he felt that it might also be a divine weapon. Hearing Bewitching's words, Bailey Hongzhuang thought for a moment. She felt that what Bewitching said also had a certain truth. The existence of divine tools was often not the same form. Perhaps there were many different forms that were not known by others. Perhaps some heaven-defying existences were divine weapons. These divine weapons could not be understood by others at all. They could only make people marvel at their magic. The existence of the stairway of heaven itself was a heaven-defying existence. No one knew what kind of existence could make the origin energy so dense to such an extent. Moreover, it showed the changes of the stairway. Perhaps it's really like this. Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. She felt that her master must have obtained some heaven-defying opportunity. That was why he could have such strength at such a young age and even relied on his own strength to establish Limitless Palace. Among the top 10 sects in Shengxian continent, except for Limitless Palace, all the other sects had extremely strong foundations and many years of inheritance. Only Limitless Palace was a new force to be reckoned with. Although it did not have many years of inheritance like the other sects, its position was unshakable. Bewitching and Bailey Hongzhuang looked at each other and had a certain idea in their hearts. They understood in their hearts that cultivators who could achieve heaven-defying results often had opportunities that ordinary people did not have. Bailey Hongzhuang sighed deeply about this point. If not for the Chaos Ring, she was afraid that she would have to put in a lot of effort to reach this step. She believed that her master was a person with great fortune. Perhaps it was because of this that his master was so resolute when he took out the Rainbow Divine Pearl. After Bailey Hongzhuang and Bewitching talked for a while, they didn't waste any more time and immediately started cultivating. Now, they were all racing against time. They only hoped that the more time they spent cultivating, the more their strength would increase. The three beasts also stopped fooling around and focused on cultivating. Now that their master's strength was getting stronger and stronger, the pressure on them was also getting greater and greater. White Lion was now eating more and more demon crystals. In addition to the demon crystals they had obtained in the desert world, he was now eating without caring about anything else. The White Lion could increase its strength by consuming demon crystals. As long as it ate more, its strength would increase very quickly. Therefore, the pressure on White Lion was not that great. In comparison, Xiaohe and Xiaobai were under a lot more pressure. Back then, White Lion's strength could not be compared to theirs. But now, White Lion's speed of improvement was so fast that they felt a strong sense of urgency. Not only that, but Master's speed of improvement was even more perverse. Chapter 1904. If they did not cultivate with all their might, they would be left far behind by their master in the future. Then, they would no longer be of any help to their master. Don't be fooled by their usual unhurried appearance. In fact, they were very clear about the current situation. A night's time slowly passed by. The next day, when the sky gradually brightened, Bailey Hongzhuang exited from her cultivation state. Today, she still had to continue cultivating in Wind Canyon. She could not waste any more time here. After last night's cultivation, she discovered that after exhausting all the elemental energy in her body many times in Wind Canyon, and then coming to such a dense elemental energy environment to cultivate, her cultivation speed and effect were much stronger than usual. After discovering this, Bailey Hongzhuang felt that even if she cultivated in Wind Canyon during the day, her cultivation speed would not slow down at all. This was because if she cultivated in Sky Stairway during the day and night, although her cultivation speed would be much faster than usual, the effect would not be as good as cultivating in Wind Canyon. Therefore, this kind of cultivation method could not be better. Di Beichun naturally knew Bailey Hongzhuang's plan. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang exiting from her cultivation state, he opened his eyes and smiled. "Wife, are you ready to go to Wind Canyon to cultivate?" Bailey Hongzhuang turned her gaze and saw Di Beichun's handsome face. Her ink-black eyes were filled with a sweet and charming smile. "It's already late. The other cultivators are also very hard-working. I think they should have already gone to Wind Canyon by now. I can't be late," Bailey Hongzhuang said. Now that the core disciples of Limitless Palace had treated her as an exchanged disciple from Tiangang's sect, she had to make the best of it. Naturally, her performance would not lose to others. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Di Beichun nodded slightly. Although Bailey Hongzhuang's hardworking appearance made his heart ache, he had to admit that such a serious and hardworking Hongzhuang gave people an indescribable beauty. Her strength, her hard work, and her fearlessness were her greatest charms. "Be careful when you cultivate. If you encounter any problems, you must tell me," Di Beichun reminded. He didn't want to see Hongzhuang suffer any losses. Hongzhuang didn't care, but his heart ached. "Master, we'll go with you." The three beasties gathered in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. They had already told their master about this matter yesterday. Now that their master was preparing to cultivate, they naturally had to follow. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and nodded when she saw how excited the three beasts were. "All right, then let's go together." Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze landed on the three beasties. "You must listen to me obediently in the Wind Canyon. Cultivate well and don't cause trouble everywhere." Bailey Hongzhuang was also very clear about the three beasties' ability to cause trouble. If they really wanted to cause trouble, then there would be a lot of trouble. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, the three beasties looked at each other and nodded. The most important thing now was to follow their master to the Wind Canyon. They could agree to anything else. "Beichun, I'm going to the Wind Canyon now. Do you want to stay here or go to the palace?" Bailey Hongzhuang asked. Chapter 1905. Di Beichun thought for a moment and said, "I'll go back to the palace first and wait for you there. We'll come back together at night." The main reason why Palace Master Yu allowed them to come to this Sky Stairway to cultivate was because of Bailey Hongzhuang. Now that Bailey Hongzhuang had gone to Wind Canyon to cultivate, it wasn't appropriate for him to continue staying here. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang also understood Di Beichun's concerns and immediately nodded. "Then bring me to cultivate in Wind Canyon, and I'll go look for you after I return." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled sweetly. Her already outstanding face was now even more dazzling, making people unable to take their eyes off her. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun left the palace together. After following the two for a while, they separated. Bailey Hongzhuang went to Wind Canyon, while Di Beichun went to the palace. On this day, when Bailey Hongzhuang came to Wind Canyon again, The way the core disciples of Limitless Palace looked at Bailey Hongzhuang was completely different from yesterday. When Pei Yifan saw Bailey Hongzhuang, he couldn't help but reveal a smile. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang also smiled slightly, expressing her goodwill. The three beasties followed closely behind Bailey Hongzhuang, their gazes constantly sizing up the crowd. They were really curious. Who exactly was that chewing Fei? This person actually dared to treat their master like that yesterday. She was really reckless. One must know that before Bewitching left this morning, he had already informed them that if they saw someone who bullied their master, they definitely didn't need to be polite. Therefore, they came here today to solemnly look for trouble. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the three beasties who kept looking around. The smile in her eyes deepened. She had been with the three beasties for such a long time, so she naturally understood their personalities very well. Just by looking at how they had solemnly vowed to come to Wind Canyon to cultivate yesterday, she had already guessed the thoughts of the three beasts. However, if she guessed correctly, Chewing Fei would not come here to cultivate for the time being. While Bailey Hongzhuang and the three beasties were having their own thoughts, the core disciples of Limitless Palace had their eyes fixed on the three beasties. Their eyes were filled with deep shock. These three contracted beasts look very intelligent. Could they be Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beasts? I think one of them should be Bailey Hongzhuang's contracted beast, but I don't know which one it is. Then why are the other two demonic beasts here? Everyone was puzzled. Contracted beasts were very hard to come by. Even if they were the core disciples of Limitless Palace, they couldn't find a suitable contracted beast in a short period of time. With their current status, it could be seen that they had boundless potential on the path of cultivation. If the contracted beast's level wasn't high, not only would it not be of any help to them in the future, it might even drag them down. Therefore, they were very careful when choosing their contracted beasts. However, there were also cultivators who had contracted beasts among them. Everyone had always been very envious of cultivators who had contracted beasts, but it was too difficult to find a suitable contracted beast. Now that they saw that Bailey Hongzhuang already had her own contracted beast, they were also envious in their hearts. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.